Welcome to the Resistance broadcast, everybody. I'm John. Thanks for joining us on this episode. Lacey with me as always. How we doing, Lacey?
Good. How are you?
Good. I see you have not only a fresh new Resistance broadcast t-shirt.
Yeah, I do.
As I am wearing the Galactic Goonies baseball t-shirt. Both
I'm
available.
glad I didn't wear that one. I was tempted, and I was like, I feel like John's going to finally wear it, and I don't want to be a couple of buddies and matching tees.
No, God forbid. But those are available at trbpodcast.com. But I also see, Lacey, you are wearing your
Galactic Goonies
Crew.
are not.
Right. The last day, it was last week, unfortunately.
It was Friday, yes.
But they may return. They may return. We'll see.
We'll see.
But Lacey, you're also wearing your Skeleton Crew bandana that I tried to get to a few times here now.
Yes. So I wore it for Christopher Ford, which, by the way, was an amazing interview. If you haven't listened to it, please go back because it is one of the best interviews we've ever done. And I'm not just saying that. He's like the nicest guy. We had such a genuine connection with him that like drove the conversation without the need of being like, let me go to my question document.
Yeah, I saw someone commented saying, and they've said this before about us, they're like, I love your interviews because it seems like you are all friends talking about this stuff and you're not just drilling a person with questions. So that I really appreciate when people say stuff like that.
I appreciate that too, because something I take pride on when doing interviews is, and I'm saying this because I'm speaking as myself, not that I'm speaking for you, John, but is I tend to follow the conversation. Like if I have a question that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, I'm probably not going to ask it unless it somehow works its way into the conversation.
Right.
Which I think my Kevin Bacon joke with him, I was waiting to make it and he brought it up and I was like, oh great, here's my Kevin Bacon moment.
I was hoping you were going to, slot that in there.
But
yeah, so
there's an art to it, to be honest. There's an art to interviewing, having conversations, talking that people don't realize when you podcast.
Yeah, and for me, it's, just being real and being human and know you're talking to another human being and getting it down to that element of just that shared love of whatever it is, whether you're the person making it or the person who loves watching it. And that continues today because...
Wait, hold on. I'm also very good at tangent because that was a tangent that I didn't actually get to my point. So anyway, I wore it for Christopher Ford and I said that I would wear it for this interview as well because this is like Galactic Goonies, Skeleton Crew, and then I will be retiring it. So I know everyone's going to miss it a lot. I'm so sorry. It will be
until Jude Law comes on the podcast. Then
I would lose my mind. Like we talk about a couple people that every once in a while you're like, I kind of like fangirl out about them. Mark Hamill's definitely one of them. I've had that experience. I like lost control of my body. Like I was like sweating and shaking and like insane. Jude Law's another one that I might get like really nervous talking to because I just think he's amazing.
Yeah. I don't even know if I would go on camera for that episode, quite frankly.
He's so good looking. Oh
my God. Like what?
Every once in a while you see people that you're like, dang, like levels I could never reach. Good looking.
Yeah, but no, jokes aside, we do have a guest that we're going to get to in just a moment. So the party rolls on, Galactic Goonies style, still loving Skeleton Crew. A lot of rewatching going on and also a lot of re-listening going on to an incredible score put together by none other than Mick Giacchino, who is on fire right now. So we'll get to it in just a moment. Lacey, what are you most excited about talking to Mick when it comes to the music of Skeleton Crew?
With people like Mick, as in composers or people that are attached to some type of musical talent, it is something that I don't have. Like, I like songs. I could never write a song. I don't know how to read music. I don't play an instrument. Like, it's just a level of intelligence and creativity that I don't have. So I'm always in awe of people. Like when we had Xanthi from Star Wars Music Minute, like it's just a different way that her brain works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm so excited to hear about his creative process, about how he comes up with these themes for characters. Like, does he look at the drawing of a character? Does he get a description of the character? Is it just kind of like, I feel like it would be like this? Like, how does he do that?
I agree. It's It's always an amazing thing because the scores are just such a layered gathering of all these different arrangements and like Chris Ford alluded to, the way Mick pulled off that finale with all the different tones and emotions and
Mhm.
heightened and soft
Mhm.
and intense. So I can't wait to see how he explains how he did all that and more, but let's get after it.
Mhm.
Let's talk to the maestro himself, Skeleton Crew's Mick Giacchino. Mick Giacchino, thank you so much for joining us on the Resistance broadcast. Welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time.
Oh God, you guys, thank you so much for having me.
It is an honor to have you. I just have to start by saying from basically moment one of Skeleton Crew, when I heard that pirate theme, I was like, we are about to go on a ride. And from that moment all the way through to the end, my favorite moment, I think, musically on the show, when they get into the elevator and the music is swelling, and you're like, I'm going to kick people right in the chest with this one. And he turns and looks for Jod. And even though Jod does all those horrible things, he's like, Jod, come with us. And I'm like, that plus the music, I'm like, this, no one watch me watch this right now, okay? It was so good. So front to back, you absolutely nailed it. And I just want to ask my first question to you about it. Can you sort of take us inside your starting point when you're making music for a show or a movie? Like, how do you get started? Is it an idea in your head? Are you writing things on a pad? Are you on a keyboard? Like, what's your starting point? And is it always the same process for every project?
Yeah, so I mean, it's usually, I mean, so I'll watch something or read or like I'll watch an episode or read the script just to get the vibe, and usually it's best to wait until there's something that's been filmed to see, because you know scripts can be interpreted in so many different ways, and
Mhm.
just to make so like once you see all the performances come through and the pacing of the editing and all that, it's a little bit easier to get an idea, a sense of what the tone should be, because everyone else has already been working on that aspect of it based off of the script and bringing that out. And again, the directors have kind of been starting to shape it. And so music can kind of come in and just kind of reinforce those ideas. Usually, I mean, there's kind of two approaches I do. Sometimes, usually what I do is I sit down at a piano and I just start kind of plunking out random ideas and just and messing around with things, and seeing. In this case, I kind of had these chords, the chords you hear over the helmet logos at the beginning, just the four, the ba 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 ba, and so once I kind of came up with that, I started fiddling around with the melody, and then I was listening to the Goonies soundtrack, and the Fratelli chase at the beginning just had such like a great energy and pacing to it, and so that kind of was the inspiration, at least for the beginning of the kids theme. And
Nice.
you hear in the suite in the show, the only opportunity I had to put that version of it in was when Wim first runs out of his house and you see Aladdin and all that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it can depend based on the project, but generally I'm either starting with chords or I'm starting with melody, and or both at the same time, and just kind of working through it and let one inform the other.
Mhm.
That really set the tone, because I remember sometimes like I see the helmets and I'm like, all right, come on, come on, come on. But then when I heard those notes in that sort of like lullaby sounding way, it, and then I had just watched The Penguin, and it's violent, it's screeching, it's chaotic. And then here you are, and you're like, this is the first thing you're going to hear from Skeleton Crew. And I'm like,
And
wow,
it's
okay.
beautiful. It's like this
Two,
beautiful, wonderful, childlike,
amazing.
whimsical theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, I really wanted that moment. Just again, like the seeing the helmets to feel like you're opening a storybook, and you're
Mhm.
about to be, like I wanted you to be Wim with his story pad right there.
Perfect.
So
So you
Wow.
mentioned that you took inspiration from a piece of music from the Goonies. Is there anything else throughout your suite of music for Skeleton Crew that you snuck things in that maybe people didn't pick up on? And you're like, oh, right here, this is from this
oh,
movie, or
uh, one thing that definitely I'm actually am surprised no one has picked up on yet. Or maybe I didn't make it as close as I could have, but it was when the crab shows up in episode 6. there's these big brass chord, like diminished chords or augment. I'm forgetting what it is at the moment, but just I have these big brass chords that are alternating between the trombones and the horn, the French horns, and it was that was my love letter to Mysterious Island by Bernard Herrmann from the I think it was from the 1950s or
wow.
Ray Harryhausen. There's a giant crab monster in that movie. That's a stop motion crab as well. So I was like, all right, this is my little like nod to this.
No,
Wow.
that's so awesome. Which we realized with our conversation with Christopher Ford, there's a lot of crabs in Star Wars. We were unaware that there's so many crabs. There's like Bad Batch crabs, Ahsoka crabs, this crab, a crab from some old book. So I love that you're like now drawing in another crab reference from something else.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
so cool.
But it's like, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like the ducks in what Phantom. There's the Wikipedia page for ducks because someone says like, you know, I guess crab is one of those the gift that keeps on giving right there.
Crab is canon. Yeah.
Crab is canon. Crab is canon for sure.
So the pirate theme, it really does set the tone because, like you say, we open the storybook and we're getting like pulled in, and like a warm blanket wraps around us, and then the pirates come in, blasting the side of the ship, and all of a sudden it's this demonstrative, aggressive theme. Where did you pull from for that? It definitely has a pirate feel to it. How'd you come up with the pirate theme, which is such a standout now?
Yeah, so that, I mean, I listened to some sea shanties, and a lot of those are either in 6/8 or 12/8 or in a lot of Irish music as well is kind of like where those shanties kind of stem from, and so from there I knew I was like, all right, there's going to be kind of a triplet feel, and I definitely wanted it to feel as piratey as I could without overstepping it and still making it feel a little bit Star Wars-y, but more focused on the pirate nature. So it was definitely, you know, I listened to the Pirate's Life for Me, and you know, all these other things, and I was just like seeing how those worked, and tried to just take little bits of like the types of chords they would use, and a little bit of instrumentation. There's this one moment from the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland that just always stuck with me when you're going through the caverns, and you just hear this like low bass flute. It's very cavernous and very kind of just like eerie and kind of and so especially when I started working with Jod's theme, and as we start to realize that he's a pirate, I scored a lot of his motif on bass or alto flute to kind of make that little bit of that pirate connection that won't feel over the top pirate from when you're first listening to it, but we'll have that connection.
Did you go back and watch videos of the ride, or did you go ride it a couple times just to like really?
Oh, I've been on that thing. I know it like the back of my hand. I did pull up. I did find because I think the soundtrack for that ride didn't have the part I was thinking of. And I was texting with a friend of mine who's like a big Disneyland nerd, and she and I were figuring it out, and we finally found it online. I think it was something that was like, it wasn't from the original version of the ride, but was something that was added in later. So, but we did find it online.
Nice. That's so helpful. You must find so many things online now compared to years ago that you could just.
Well, there's a point too where I was like, am I making this up? There's like, it's gonna be here. Like, it's like I know that sound.
You mentioned Jod's theme. One of the other parts of music that really gripped me, and it's like the same thing with your dad's music, whether it's Lost or Super 8, Rogue One, like you guys pack a lot of emotion behind your music. And when that key is floating across, like there's just this beautiful piece that's playing, and then you parlay that into the Force theme a little bit, but like that track, Illusions of Grandeur, like it's so beautiful. Is that meant for Jod, and then you sort of dirty it up later as we see him get more of this gross personality side of him comes out?
Yeah, so that that was me taking Jod's theme, which is the ba 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 ba. I'm a little pitchy. I'm not a singer, but I did a major version of it, which is ba 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 ba. Like that kind of was going up more rather than down, and I had the Force theme in mind in that moment because I remember like when I first was scoring that scene, I was like, is this something like, do we do the Force theme here? Do we not? I asked, and they're like, no, I don't think we're doing it here because again, like there's some just behind the scenes like just technical stuff where it's like I don't know if we're allowed to use it. I don't, and so the initial thought was that we weren't allowed to use it. So I did Jod's theme in a Force-like way, and it starts with that perfect fourth, just like the Force theme does. And then when we were doing the dub review for it after we had recorded the first 3 episodes, Filoni was like, oh, I think actually this might be a moment, because we had more sessions lined up that we were going to be recorded for the rest of the season. So he's like, if there's time, like actually I think this would be a moment that would make sense to actually quote the Force theme, since we're so close to it, and also it's relevant to the moment. So that was kind of I didn't even have to change any of the orchestration. I just laid the melody over top, and I just had the cello play it, and it ended up just working perfectly with what was already there. And so it's like now the way it turned out is it feels like it's teasing you a little bit.
It's
and
like
then
a thread that goes through the moment.
And then it kind of goes back into Jod's theme as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
It had us all saying, "Oh, well, he's definitely a Jedi and Force user now." And and so then when we were talking,
you're part of the team that fools us all. That has us
yeah,
being
exactly.
like, well, clearly
the magicians. Yeah. So
hey, we weren't fooling anyone. He was, that was the Force.
I know.
There.
Yeah, and we were talking to Christopher Ford last week, and he said, "Oh, we had gotten a tip that the Obi-Wan show had a fake Jedi, and we were sort of thinking about doing that with Jod." So it really comes down to almost like the end when everything's finally decided, where you can say like, "Oh, we're gonna go with this." Is that realistic in terms of like the fully realized version of that character? So you're not accidentally misleading people? Is that a challenge there? Like because they had to sort of alter the characters?
I think they definitely wanted it to be up to interpretation until we find out for real, because look, I think one of the most fun things about watching a show, especially week to week, where it doesn't drop all at once and you have to wait like till the next week to watch, it creates so much discourse, and it lets you have like a week in between each episode. As painful as that can be sometimes, it's fun to see everyone talking about it and theorizing what might be going on. And so actually in some of the earlier cuts that I was working on, there were definitely more lines of dialogue that were kind of like made even me think it from it was like, okay, is he? I don't know. Is that the Force? Because I was thinking about that character in Obi-Wan as well, where in episode 5 in particular, when Jod and Wim are having that little moment on the ship when Wim's saying how he misses his parents, and Jod's
about attachments.
Forget them. Yeah, exactly. And when he kind of Force pulls the story pad into Wim's hand, like Wim had this moment of like, oh, what's, how did you lift the key if you're not a Jedi? And like there was a line where he was like, oh, like simple tricks, and he kind of then leaves, and so they cut that, so he just gives him a little wink instead, and just I was that. Because I was like, oh, okay. Because I was leaning. It made me more surprised at the end when I found out, when I was like, oh shit, he is a Force user. So I think they wanted to try to, leave a little bit more breadcrumbs of like leading you to the correct answer. But
oh wow, and that's a Han Solo nod too. That was cut then. Simple tricks and nonsense. It was what he calls the Force in A New Hope.
Yeah.
Oh my
Which
God.
is also the name of that track, Illusions of Grandeur. Is
exactly. Well. That's when I was naming the tracks, I was like,
I loved the naming. Yeah. How'd you come up with the different names? Were you just like sitting there?
So
and you
good.
Came up with...
I mean, well, it's okay. So I mean, look, it's a tradition that my dad started, I think, way back on like Alias or so, because he and his music editor they were naming cues, and they were like, there's so many like music or like soundtrack cues that are called like The Chase or like Escape or all of this. And so just for the fun of it, they started challenging themselves to see who could come up with the best puns. And it's just something that I always loved about my dad's scores, and I wanted to kind of continue the tradition. And so it was something that where like me and my music editor would I would name them, and sometimes he would come up with names as well. And so like what was oh god, I'd have to see the list in front of me, but one of my favorites, which was actually the last one we named, it was right when we were compiling the soundtrack, because we edited 2 cues together just to make a better listening experience, and he came up with Up to Nawood.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a brilliant one right there. So all credit goes to Luke Dennis on that one. But Adding Down the Hatches was one that I've been saving all season. I was like, if they if there's a pirate invasion in the last episode, like there has to be at Adding Down the Hatches.
You're like, guys, you have to add a scene because that title is so good for a track.
Exactly. Because like, I mean, sometimes I'll just, if I come up with a name for a cue but it doesn't fit in that episode, I'll just write it down and I'll put it in a list where I'm like, okay, maybe I can use this later. So I've got some that didn't make the cut, and others lying around, but yeah.
Do you have one name that you're like saving because it didn't make the cut that you're like, I'm gonna work this in somehow? Penguin 2, I don't know.
Ooh, that's hard because there's so many of them are so specific to the thing. The one to the show, each show in particular. I wanted to do the Great and Powerful Oz at one point, but for the Penguin, but I didn't. There were other names that felt more better in those situations, but I think the one that I missed the most from Skeleton Crew that just was like, I think it was just too goofy to be released for them was because most of them got approved, but some of them they were like, all right, like I think it was the ones that were referencing other things, but an I-Rat's Life for me was the original track of when
oh my god, that's amazing.
When Snowball the rat is running to get the key in episode 2. But I think understandably so. I think they were trying to stay away from some of the track titles that reference other properties and such.
Yeah, I get that.
I was like, I understand, but it hurt. I was like, because that was one of my favorites, but it's
I mean, Fear of Jod. I mean, that's so simple but so great.
Yeah.
And that. I mean, that is sort of a dark track too. Compared to the other, your introduction to Jod and stuff like that. Now, I mean, I played concert band through high school, but I'm not an expert. I didn't do well in music appreciation in college. I had a hard time with it. But did you take a lot of the Jod theme notes and just bring them down for some of his darker moments, or was it another path that you took and like took it to a different level?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most, I mean, sometimes I'll mess with the notes or what scale the theme is being played in, but for the most part, like when you hear his theme in episode 3, I think the first full statement of it, that like in kind of like the Jod way, is when he runs into his old shipmate when he's getting 33 out of there, and that's where that bass flute comes in, when alto flute, kind of in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride style.
Yes.
That I was talking about earlier, but so that was kind of like that theme, or that version of the theme, which again is the main version of it, wound up working as where I could play it mysteriously, but also if I voiced it in the low brass, it could be scarier, or if I put it up in the mid range in the French horns, it could really sound really mean. And so, at times I would manipulate it if it felt like it needed to be manipulated, but I feel like I landed kind of in a spot where it felt like, just based on instrumentation or register, I would be able to, be flexible.
Wow.
So with this soundtrack, you brought up bringing in elements of the pirates and from Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff. But when I was listening through it multiple times leading up to talking to you, I noticed that there were a lot of different genres throughout this series, from horror to the sci-fi stuff with the theremin, with Kim. Is there a particular genre that you prefer to write for? Because like John said, you do the Penguin, which is violent, dark, gritty, stuff like that. And then you have this like whimsical storybook hug type music for Star Wars. Is there a type of genre that you prefer to be like, I love getting scary, I love being more sci-fi?
I mean, honestly, like I really love being able to try different things, because I think probably, you know, I just get scared that I'm going to end up writing the same thing over and over again if I do the same genre too much. But
Yeah.
but for me, like, and what was so fun about Skeleton Crew, again, you know, Penguin was like this really dark and kind of scary place that I got to create some and make some really weird sounds and tones and textures with and melodies, and Skeleton Crew was definitely a little bit more like, you know, all over the place in terms of, again, you'd have the horror moments, you'd have the
Open Sesame is like
moment.
very creepy.
Oh,
which is
good.
funny because the
Yeah.
title is like Open Sesame, come on
Yeah.
in. And then you're like listening to it and you're like, oh, I don't want to be in here wherever I
Yeah.
just walked
No,
into.
Yeah, I was like, what's in there? I don't know. But so I think my answer to that question would probably be anything. Like, my favorite stuff is anything that allows me to really write with like melody and try to let the music be a character, because that's just the most fun to me and most enjoyable. I don't know, I like being playful, where, you know, especially like bouncing off of like, not necessarily Mickey Mousing the score, but being able to play off of what's happening on screen, and rather than just having a bed that just kind of is underneath the whole thing. So yeah, I think, you know, anything with melody is kind of or my favorite things to write, I guess.
What was the most challenging part of the show? Which piece?
Which piece? It would have probably, I mean, some of that action stuff, you know, it's just, you know, there most of the time I had time to work on this, and then there were other episodes later down the line where it was like, as we were getting new cuts of the earlier episodes, I'd have to update those cues, and then also while still writing new material for the later episodes. So, but I think probably. Yeah, I'd say probably some of the action stuff would like take the longest, just in terms of like, you know, trying to make sure, especially also when it's a cue would be so tailored to a scene. And I
was
think
going to
that's
say you're following the action, so it's probably
that's one thing I learned, was that it's like, all right, your first passes should be kind of like, again, like trying to make the turns with what's happening with the picture, but then ultimately, especially on shows like this where there's a lot of VFX, you know, the timing is going to change, or they're going to cut stuff out, and it's going to end up, if you're moving around too much, it becomes more difficult to actually edit it to make it sound like it's like one continuous piece rather than something that's been chopped up and shortened to fit the new stuff. So as I went on, I learned that early on, and as I got through the season, I learned to kind of have it be a little bit more like still reacting to things, but a little bit more open-ended. Yeah. And then as soon as I would get the more locked, the closer to locked cut, I would start putting in all the details and be like, oh, you know what, I can hit this thing here because now I know that all this time has been taken out, so I can, you know, I can adjust it in this way. So
outside of the podcast in real life, I do a lot of video editing, and one of the most horrendous things is when you make a video and you send it to someone for approval, and then they go, I like it, but can you pick a different song? And you're like, oh my God, I just cut this whole thing to this song. So I can kind of, not in the same way, obviously yours is very more complicated and creative and stuff, but I feel for the like, wait, I now have to cut this down by 30 seconds and I have to redo this whole thing.
Yeah.
Did you have any tracks that you were like, I nailed it, oh my God, it's perfect, and they're like, oh, we're adding a little shot here, and you're like, no.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. There, and it's funny, like the scene where Jod and the kids are escaping Kim's moon at the end of episode 3. That's like a long action cue right there, or there's like a 6-minute long cue. And when I first wrote it, it was like 8 minutes or 8.5 minutes, that sequence. So I was like, I remember just spending so much time on it, and I was like, okay, I feel like everything's working and it's all leading to the next thing. And again, then they cut out like 2 minutes of the sequence, and I was like, oh no. But like I went back to listen to the original version of it a few months ago or so, or when the show came out, because I was just curious again to see it, because it had been so long since I heard that, and hearing the old version that I was like so sad to lose bits of with the new version, I was like, the new version works better. It's actually I was like the old
nice.
version like was like jumping around more and stuff, and I was like this felt more cohesive. So
wow,
or
you're
was
just
one of those
very
things where
adaptable.
I was like frustrated in the moment, and then kind of like going back to it, I'm like, no, this is the right thing.
Well, Christopher Ford. So we did like a rundown with him, like say one sentence about each of these people, and we asked him to say something about you, and he said talent, just exploding talent. And then he
on.
followed that by saying, when we were talking about the finale, and he was almost saying like he felt bad what they put you through, because he said he was so amazed at how, and you just sort of touched on that. You wanted to first make sure you dove into the characters, made themes for them, but that in the finale, they're going from like, yay, da 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 da, to oh my god, this is terrible. And the fact that you were able to weave that, he called it, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but like a massive technical achievement. He did so. Your showrunners like sang your praises for how you handled the finale, and it almost sounded like he was apologizing for what he put you through on that one.
I was gonna say, by the way, he should not be apologizing for anything. It was like it was so much fun on this, you know. There was and it's part of the process. Things are going to change no matter what you're working on, and again, especially in a VFX heavy show like this. So it's like, and also by the time we get to the end of the season, again, you've been through 7 episodes of this, and I'm like, all right, like I know what's coming.
Right.
It's funny that you mentioned that moment by the door, because that was a product of it getting shorter. But I had always had that moment where when Wim yells out Jod, there's like kind of like a small little kind of hidden statement of the kids theme just going bum bum, and then it kind of like it's like the 2 middle chords of that, because I landed on the first 3 chords of the theme. It's like bum bum bum, and then it kind of goes into the next thing, but to give it space right there. And so right before we locked the picture, actually the last thing we did too was I was fixing that edit, because I had realized that when something had gotten taken out, that whole moment was glossed over, and I was like no, it has to, we have to make sure we hit this. And so again, Luke Dennis, my music editor, and we sat down and we just went through version after version of this, of just trying to figure out how to make it work. And when we finally nailed it, I was like, it was hitting on the door and it was hitting on all that. So I'm glad that was something that you picked up on and that spoke to you, because that was definitely, it was very intentional to try to make sure that was kept and still worked.
That was a heavy moment. And then like just
mine was right after that with Jod looking at the window. Oh, yeah. Loved it. Favorite moment of the series.
Thank you.
Yeah,
like the dream is dead.
Yeah, right.
His dream is dead. And that shot, I mean, they said that it wasn't intentional, I guess, but that was the end of Fight Club. Like when they're looking out.
Yeah, it does kind of look like that. Yeah,
it's crazy. It blew my mind. But Wim looking back to Jod and just like yelling for him after everything he just put them through, and then like with your music on top of it, I'm just like they are hammering home the fact that this kid is just pure goodness, unflinching goodness, and he has faith and hope in everybody. And that's a powerful thing, because I'm a dad. I have a 6-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and like you know, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, and you want to see kids, especially, doing the right thing when, like George Lucas said, you're faced with a choice to do good or bad, and Wim gets it. He always dreamed about being a Jedi, but like he actually sort of became one without even knowing it. And I feel like the music was a perfect just wrapping around that feeling in that moment. I don't know what it was about that moment. That was the most emotional moment of the show for me, without question. The group hug too at the end was really awesome too.
What was your favorite moment?
The group hug on the corner.
Oh yeah, the group hug. Yeah. I know. I just saw a video that the Star Wars account had posted where there was an interview with them, and they were talking about how like the credits were hurting their knees as they were, but it's like how emotional filming that scene was for them. My favorite scene, or my favorite thing to do, it's tough. That's a tough question, because like there's so many different things. I think episode 3 had a lot of really fun action stuff that I got to write, which and again it was very playful too, which I always love doing. And getting to be a little bit not necessarily comedic, but again have a playful tone to it.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed doing the pirate port on the Port Borgo stuff. Was such a blast. again, that ending scene was a lot of fun, to especially building up to the ship going down, the pirate ship going down, and just getting to sit in that emotional space. I mean, I could go on, but it just, I had so much fun on so many of these cues, but those probably a couple of highlights for me.
Speaking of space, one of my kind of favorite moments in the soundtrack is when the kids finally get up past the barrier and they're just sitting in space and they see stars. It's such like a beautiful, like quiet but not quiet moment. It's like calm and wonderful, and then it gets into hyperspace.
Yeah.
So I guess this might sound like a dumb question, but how do you know what space sounds like? Like, how do you decide what a character sounds like, sounds like, with your music, or like they're in a cave, this is what the cave would sound like? Because I can't even think, like my brain doesn't operate that way. But when I heard that music of them being in space, I was like, this actually is what space would probably sound like. It's like so wonderful.
It's funny because actually I don't really necessarily think about it as the location. It's more, what is the location making these characters feel?
Oh, okay, great.
And it's kind of more interpreting that emotional moment. And so, like for the kids, like when they get out past the barrier and they see stars for the first time in their life, like first off, and they're in space, like I was putting myself in their shoes of, I'm like, if I like, like even after all this chaos, if you just have this moment of being like out in space for a second where you're seeing this beautiful star field,
everything slows down.
Everything slows down for a second, and it gets quiet, and there's a wonder there. And so you give them the brief wonder, and then things start to get scary as the hyperdrive comes on, and everyone's like, what's happening? And so the music gets bigger there. But yeah, it's definitely, I like to try, I'm always trying to figure out what the emotional headspace of the character is.
No, I love that. That's a great way of thinking about it.
You brought up the action sequences in episode 3, and I remember first watching, and that scene where Jod is trying to get back to them on the Onyx Cinder, it like Jude is like really, it's a very comedic moment. He's in the cockpit and the music was right there with it. And I mean, we had talked to J.W. Rinsler a long time ago, and he was like, George Lucas always said Star Wars has to be funny. And Skeleton Crew brought back the funny in Star Wars. And that is a very funny moment, even though it's action-packed. And it's like that Star Wars action funniness. And then I think about like SM33 and like the comedic timing of Nick Frost. And I always heard that writing comedy is one of the hardest things to do, is writing music to fit around comedic dialogue a very difficult thing to do, because you nailed all of it and gave the character breathing room, but I feel like the music fit perfectly in those moments, especially with SM33. Can you touch on like how is it hard to write music around comedic scenes?
Yes, totally. Because I mean, like, it's such a fine line where, it can start to feel dopey. And I never really want to write anything that ends up kind of just being like, oh, okay, this is funny, so we're doing the series, we're being funny here, right? Because like, also that's not necessarily what the characters are feeling either. So it's like, I usually, again, I'm always looking for the emotional state that these people are in, and so oftentimes I find that, like, for me at least, when I'm writing comedy, it's more about like the starts and stops and leaving space for certain beats to come through, or keeping the energy up and just keeping it, like, it can be fun, but it's more about finding those kind of, just almost using the score as like dialogue, in a sense of kind of like in having a conversation and letting it set up a joke or a punchline and operate in that sense. But it's definitely, I always struggle with it as I'm going through, and it takes a while before it starts to kind of feel right.
You trust your audience though, because like I'm seeing the theme here is you're writing for what the character's feeling, not what the audience should be feeling from the character. Like SM33 doesn't know he's being funny.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny to us.
Exactly.
So I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, because you're laughing at the situation of it. And actually, one of my favorite moments, or one of the most fun moments for me, was just is in episode 5, that we didn't have room on the soundtrack to put this cue in, but just when Jod and KB and NEEL are trying to escape the guards up top, and after the mud kind of like, you know, pipe explodes, and there's a moment where John punches one of the guys, and this was one of the things where when it got cut down, the scene got cut down, it was actually really easy to keep this moment. But as he punches it, I kind of built up to it with a little bit of his theme going, ba-bum, bum, punch. So it's just like, again, like sticking in the rhythm of all that.
That felt like Indiana Jones, and I swear the punch sound effect was out of Indiana Jones. Yeah. Like that was you wrote a little Indiana Jones piece there in my heart. Like,
hey, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Are you so obviously John Williams, greatest of all time? Like it. I know your dad, I believe, was the first person to do a Star Wars movie that wasn't John Williams. Did you go to him? Did you need to go to him for any advice on, like, you know, this is John Williams' turf and we're playing in it, or did, like, where did you find the confidence to be like, I don't have to live up to John Williams? Like, what was that element like?
Yeah, I mean, look, that it's obviously it's a very intimidating thing because, you know, he's kind of like the guy, you know, and John Williams is, and so it's like I definitely talked to my dad about just what it was like working on it. But I think the thing that I ultimately came to was that it's like, all right, like, yes, this is a show that's set in the Star Wars universe, but this isn't Star Wars. This is something that's adjacent to it, and it's like, but it's really more in line with the Goonies or E.T. or Back to the Future. And so that kind of helped. Just thinking about it in those terms kind of helped a little bit with the pressure of it, and just feeling the and the intensity of kind of like, this is a Star Wars thing. And of course, there's moments where we lean. I wanted to lean more into the Star Wars sound, and a lot of other times where it's kind of, all right, we're going to do a little bit of our own thing right here. But yeah, I was always thinking of it more as kind of like, all right, what's fitting this right now? And again, it usually was something that would be more in line with like E.T. or the Goonies, or which again, also great scores that are like, you know, it's scary to go up against, but you know, it doesn't have the same franchise weight that Star Wars does in terms of but.
Well, luckily you're coming after someone like Ludwig, in the sense that he went a completely different route with Star Wars.
Oh,
so you're like, well, I'm sticking in the same kind of lane, but you know,
it's like we're a little bit more adjacent. And I love, oh my God, everything you did with the recorders and all of that.
Amazing.
Incredible. And so again, like that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence in like, all right, I can lean a little bit more piratey into this. Like, you know,
do your own thing.
With kind of doing the genre thing. And so yeah, definitely. I mean, Ludwig definitely paved a road of like, you know, Star Wars doesn't have to be this one thing. It can feel like it's influenced by it or adjacent to it, but it can go beyond it as well.
And that's I know Favreau was looking for different with Mando. Did Favreau have any input or influence as executive producer in terms of the approach to music, or did you just say like, do your thing, man?
I mean, like they were on the first two meetings I had were just with the trio who we call John Watts, Chris Ford, and Chris Bongiorno. And so the first meeting we had was just, I played them the suite, and that was just them. And then we reviewed the first episode. And then after we reviewed the first episode and they gave me some notes, I made some updates, and they were happy. They were happy with the direction. Then we sat down with Favreau and Filoni as well, and you know, that's obviously intimidating. But it was one of those things where we went through the whole episode, and then you know, they may have had little thoughts here or there, but I just remember John Watts was like, at the end, he's like, so like, is it working? Are we in the right direction, or are we doing something crazy right here? Or we, you know, like, they're just kind of like, no, I honestly, like, they're like, I honestly just got lost in kind of watching it, and like, yeah, it's working for me. So it was like, all right, great. So from there we kind of moved on, and they were on all the meetings after that as well, and they would, you know, have maybe an occasional note here or there. But yeah, they were, you know, very supportive, very helpful.
Do you walk out of those meetings, and first of all, was Filoni doodling, and do you walk out of those meetings like when they give that thumbs up and you're just like, yes, like by yourself, just like nailed it. Got it.
Yeah, well, they would all be over on, over like a streaming link too. So like, there's only one time. There's only one.
You forget to log off, and you're like, "Yeah, way to go,
exactly.
me!"
No, always make sure it's like quit Safari, quit all the
Delete,
browsers,
shut
all the
phone off.
applications.
Yeah.
My microphone's off or whatever. And there's like, it's definitely, there's like, you can feel the tension kind of like release. It's like, okay, all right.
Oh,
like,
that's awesome.
Like, all right, it's working. It's working.
We coined a phrase on the show throughout Skeleton Crew on our show Galactic Goonies called, we would say either, man, he Giacchinoed really hard on that episode, or there was a heavy dose of Giacchinoing happening on that show. So we just want you to know that you've sort of become a verb in terms of how hard you go on the music in Skeleton Crew, and it's just been something
everywhere, just all over the place.
Yeah, he Giacchinoed so hard at the end of the finale. It was, oh my god.
Yeah.
So we just had to share that with you because it was an ongoing thing we did all season. I don't think we've never done that with another composer in Star Wars before. Like, we never said like, oh, he Williams the hell out of that track. It was no, it's you Giacchinoed.
Oh my god, thank you guys. That means so much.
And everybody seems to love it. So, I mean, it's like across the board. I know you've been on other podcasts, and I see on social media, I've even said, I think, like, give him the keys. I would love to see you, do some Star Wars movies and stuff like that. I mean, it goes without saying, you touched on all different types of emotions, so that if you ever had to say, like, oh, can you do this type of Star Wars? Just be like, just Skeleton Crew, just listen to all that, and it's all in there. All your Star Wars is in there.
Oh, and again, I think that was one of what was so special about Skeleton Crew for me, is like, I got to do all these things. There's like a world for it, and there's a reason to do it. And so I'm glad it came across for you and it worked and you enjoyed it. Really. Yeah. I would love to do more. I would love to do more. So.
Yeah, and we would love to see more of the Skeleton Crew or whatever, because Chris Ford said like, oh yeah, we have ideas for other stories, so hopefully people want to hear them, and it's like, yeah, we do.
I know. I want to see what these kids are like in their in their teens, and I feel like
then you got to write the angsty music for them.
Exactly. I know. I've thought about that too. I was like, okay, if there is a season 2 that gets greenlit, I was like, all right, it's gonna probably have a different feel to it. It's probably gonna be a little bit like, not like fully gritty, but like a little bit more, they're older now. And honestly, I just want a season 2 for just purely for seeing like NEEL going through puberty and like getting his tusks coming in, and like,
emo hair.
Exactly, emo hair. Yeah. Like, all the other kids are aging, so I want to see what
NEEL has to grow up.
Yeah.
A little bit closer to
maybe,
like his
maybe a little
dad.
bit of a goatee coming in a little bit.
Oh, a little soul patch.
little NEEL soul patch. Yeah, just some double or peach fuzz, like.
Yeah. Little 5 o'clock shadow for NEEL.
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms of instrument choices, it seems like strings are often used for emotion, and like heavy horns are used for heavy action in Star Wars, at least with John Williams. And you've already touched on that you use those for different variations with like Jod and stuff. Do you have a specific set of instruments that you love writing for the most, more than others? And are some tedious for you, but you need them?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Definitely, like the harp is such a beautiful instrument, and sometimes that can get difficult if you start to get a little bit too chromatic with it, because of the way that the harps work with the pedals, and so they essentially the harps have these pedals on the bottom of them where they have like a scale, like that, they can be tuned to C major, and then if you want to play in C minor, you have to hit some of the pedals to change the tension of the strings, so that it's like, all right, all the E's go to E flat, and and the B's to B flat, and all. So there's infinite, or not infinite, but there's a bunch of different combinations, and so if you get a little too carried away, you might get to a point where it's like, okay, this is actually not playable because it's jumping around to all these different things, and you would need a second harp at point. But but if you're staying within the key, it's just it's almost like writing for piano a little bit, and kind of just the left hand, right hand. But I mean, strings are always fun in terms of I on this one, actually I wrote a lot for woodwinds, and which is something I haven't really done as much of just on other projects. And this for whatever reason, the woodwinds were like calling to me on this, and just, you know, there was some bassoon solos where there's been times in my life where I'm like, I don't know what to do with the bassoon like right now, and then I found myself writing like melodic lines for it, and I'm like, oh, and I don't know exactly what that came from, but like I was so I mean, I don't know, it's I love French horns, I love trumpets, you know, it's I mean,
French
that's
horns,
all
man,
fun.
yeah.
French
French horns
timpani,
are like
yeah.
timpani.
Oh.
So yeah, what about timpani?
I was gonna say timpani can be is another one where it's like it is easy to get a little bit carried away at times because they're like, you know, limited with like, you know, how many notes they can play, and how also you have to go from one side to the other. So like there were times where I would write something like, okay, I have to pull this back a little bit, or like, let's, you know, simplify it just to, and again, ultimately it ends up sounding better too, because it's used when it's needed, rather than throughout the whole thing. But if you're, you know, doing an action cue where like the pitches are, or where the key is changing constantly and stuff, you have to be really smart about what you're doing with it.
Do you ever go ham and just start banging on them? Just for
if I had some here, for sure, 100%. Anytime my friends would walk through the door, I would be doing a big bum bum bum.
You're like, here's the Olympics, come on in.
Exactly, yeah.
Sorry, no, it's okay. On social media, I saw a picture of you and John Watts at a recording session. Like, I guess it was the recording day. Can you talk through that experience? Like, what was it like having all these people play your music and being there with John Watts, and who else was there?
Yeah, it's the best part of the whole process for me. I mean, it's just because you know, while writing, I'm just listening to these synth versions of all the instruments, and I'm like, all right, like it's painting a picture of what it will sound like, but there's like the emotional quality of it is missing, and just kind of like the nuance. And so when you get to the stage and hear everyone playing, it blows me away every time, because first off, those musicians have not seen the music until they sit down that morning, so they don't practice.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It's sight reading is like reading a book to them. They just sit down and again, you know, 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's like almost perfect the first time.
Wow.
You know, and there may be some spots you have to work or so, and then you know, take time to shape it and maybe give notes that were like, oh, you know what, like this trumpet is up too high, let's take it down an octave. And, you know,
I would have never thought that they showed up just like, okay, let's do this. Like,
they're incredible. They are insane.
Is it orchestral, or do you meet with? Oh, okay. So is that
everyone
intimidating?
in the same room together? Oh, I mean, yeah, it's definitely intimidating. I mean, I get to, you know, I like to be in the booth rather than conduct, because then I can like look up at the screen and listen to the music while seeing what's going on. And also that's where, you know, like John will be in the booth, and it's just easier to talk about things right there. And then, you know, and then I just feel like I can focus on what it sounds like more than being like, okay, don't mess up right now. Like I can't mess up as well, you know?
Right.
But and again, I think, you know, every time I've gotten to work with like, you know, an ensemble like that, it's just, you have this feeling of like, wow, this is like, you know, this is such a part of human history is what they're doing. And in certain ways, it's like so archaic, and kind of like you're literally just, you know, taking horse hairs and scraping it against like a metal string that's vibrating, and just is creating this pleasant tone that is nice to hear. And it's like, it really, I don't know, you really kind of get a sense of like how ancient like music is, and just kind of how it's like, you know, it's again, all these people have spent their whole lives working to get to the point where they are today. So it's such a special experience for me whenever I get to hear that.
I was going to say, because you had said that you kind of mock it up with synth instruments of like what you think it's going to sound like, but getting an actual human to play the instrument for you and getting that sound is completely different. And I love that, especially in a world that we're in right now where everybody's pushing AI and pushing all this technology, and it's like we're losing art in the process. So it's just lovely to hear this whole thing where you have these extremely talented people that have dedicated their lives to playing certain instruments, getting their moment to play your music, and you've dedicated your time and love to this. I love hearing about it.
Yeah, because like also like the difficulty of their craft too, like is part of what is put into the emotion of it. Like if even like like a soft, like, like what seems like an easy oboe solo to play, just if it's something very lyrical, like, is especially after, in those sessions, like if we're jumping off of like an action cue and moving to like a more emotional cue, there's like this,
it's the breath. It's literally
human,
someone
exactly,
breathing into it. Yeah.
You get tired. And so like there was one time, again, we did the episode 8 action cue and down the hatches, and then I was like, all right, I'll give you something easy. We'll do this soft, this easy cue that's got a couple solos here or there. And afterwards I was talking to Laura Wickies, who played oboe and French or English horn on the show, and she was like, oh my god, she was like, I was just telling her how amazing she played on it was the scene with Women KB was what we did next.
Yes.
There's a lot of great women solos in that. And she I was telling her how much I loved it, and she's like, oh my god, I got like right after we finished that action cue, she's like, please don't do like a quiet, like, like oboe solo. Please don't do a quiet oboe solo. And that's what we pulled up at it. And she was like, but there's, I think, like the effort that she's put into it, like adds to the emotion of it as well, and it's just the difficulty of playing that, following the other, this big action cue, just it adds to the fragility of the sound too, which I thought was just absolutely gorgeous.
Right, and you couldn't do it without them. I do have to laugh though, because you think of Star Wars, you're like, a French horn hates to see Star Wars come in, because there's tons of French horn when it's Star Wars.
Well, that was the thing too. I just remember there was multiple moments where I would say to like one of my orchestrators, I'd be like, is like, are we pushing the brass too hard, like on this? Like, is there too much brass like throughout the whole section? And they're like, it's Star Wars. They know what they're getting into.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they know what they're doing.
When did you start playing music?
Probably around like 3rd grade or so. I was taking piano, and I mean, in like high school, I was in middle school, I was playing more in like rock bands, and I played trumpet for like 3rd grade through 8th grade, and I got braces and it hurt my lips.
Oh, yeah.
I gave it up. I mean, I was never great at it. I heard some recordings a few months ago and I was like, oh God. It was, and also, I mean, I just always grew up going to the sessions as well. Like my dad would always pull me out of school for a day and to come listen, and I would always ask to come back. So like I always grew up around it, but I really started playing kind of again like late elementary school, middle school is when I started to get more serious about it. And yeah,
that's awesome. Man.
High school.
So cool.
So were there any particular movies that really grabbed you from a musical perspective? Like, do you have a favorite? Like, is Close Encounters your favorite score? Like, do you have a favorite movie score of all time?
Close Encounters is one of my favorite scores of all time for sure. Just again, talk about just like the emotional explosion at the end of just that whole. I think it's like an 11-minute long sequence, or that last cue on the soundtrack where the ship lands, and everyone's coming out, and it's just this. There's creepiness, there's whimsicality, there's wonder, and it just builds up to the end credits in a way where the payoff is just like almost like no other film score I've heard. There's so many great examples of stuff like that, but that's one of the best versions of it. And it. Again, just what he does with the melodies and how they interact, and I love that. The Adventures of Robin Hood by Eric Korngold from 1937.
Wow.
1938. That was one that I had on repeat as a kid. And
really, I gotta look that up now.
It's great.
Me too. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, Eric Korngold's great. He's got a lot of good stuff.
Well, now I got new homework new entertainment to listen to. Do you have now? Did you? This might be my dumb question, I guess. But did you get to visit set a lot, or were you not there?
No, they were done shooting by the time I started. Okay. And there was I think like there was a few days of reshoots or so, and I was texting with the post supervisor. I was like, is there like a version of where I can come down? But it was like an hour away from where I live. And I was also really busy with conforming the old episodes to the new cuts, and then also writing the next episodes. And so it didn't work out in terms of the timing, but again, if there's a season 2, I'm like, I'm coming to
You're
this.
getting there.
I need
Yeah.
to see 33. I need to, like see the Onyx Cinder.
Or maybe you get
Absolutely.
involved in another project.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
exactly.
maybe you get
Hey,
to cameo as an alien and you get to be on set and be.
That's what I want. That's the dream right there.
Did you already
Isn't
come up
it?
with your
It's such a
idea
good-
of your alien name or what you would be? What type of species you would want to be?
Oh, that's a good question. Ooh, I mean,
Are you tall? How about a Wookiee?
I'm not Wookiee tall. I could be like a Wookiee,
Okay.
I could be like a Wookiee teenager or child. Maybe. I'm 5'10", so definitely way shorter than a Wookiee.
So when the skeleton crew were teenagers in season 2, and you get the emo hair with NEEL, you could be their new buddy.
There we go. I like it. If you could tell Chris Ford that for me, that'd be,
Hello, just fire up an email over to Chris. Yeah.
yeah.
Did you get to at least? Is it important to meet the cast, or is that not a factor? Like whether it's.
It's funny. We wanted to invite the kids to a scoring session, but it was just it didn't end up working out just in terms of timing and all that. And also they like to, especially for like Lucasfilm likes to keep the scoring sessions small just, so that we can focus on kind of what's happening. But I got to meet a few of them at the premiere, and they were just amazing. They're so sweet, awesome. Hilarious, and just again, you're like. You're like, oh, these actors, and you go up to them, it's like, yeah, they're children, but they're like very mature, and they're super well spoken, and
so talented,
so sweet, so talented. Oh my God, they're especially in that last episode, like they're all of the kids have like really great moments in that, and I mean, one of my favorites too is in episode 4 with Wim and Fern by the window. There's some really great performances that they did.
Yeah, and those were and those little emotional moments too. Do you have to like make sure you're not putting your foot on the gas too much?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like there were definitely times. I mean, and you asked earlier about kind of like what some of the harder scenes were, and it's the ones that were the simplest or that appear to be the simplest to write, like in terms of like. Because like I'm like, all right, I know this scene needs to be simple, but just nothing feels right as you're working through it. I'm like, even just like if I'm just doing simple chords, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it until you little by little the picture starts to come into focus, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm getting closer, and then again, sometimes you go too far, and it's like you overdo, you get too excited with the orchestration, and it gets more complex, and then you watch it with the scene, you're like, oh, this is too much, and so always trying to pull back, so it just feels like it's in the right zone.
Yeah, I loved the moment that Fern and her mother have in the last episode. Fern and Farah talk about like there's good people in the world, no matter what dangers. You really like let that moment breathe, and then I couldn't help but think how difficult it is because they're parallel cutting with like people getting blown up outside to this moment that she's like, Mom, trust me, and then you cut right to the next thing. I'm like, this poor guy's going energy, no energy. I
know. I always thought of that sequence as like kind of like if you're listening, I mean. Like the way that the Battle of Endor is structured at the end of Return of the Jedi, where again you're jumping between action and then
Walk's dying, Luke talking to his father,
exactly, and then there's some emotional moments too. So I was definitely like listening to that just to see kind of like how he would jump in and out of stuff, and
I would too. Like you're like, if John Williams did it, then I can do it. Like,
well, I mean, no, it's usually like, all right, if John Williams did it, then I can do it maybe 10% as good. Like,
get out of here.
Like I was like, oh, I'll use it it's like a shining star as a little beacon.
Well, I mean, you're humble, but you are exploding.
Have you met
talent,
John?
So.
A long time.
I don't know
ago.
why I'm talking
long,
like I know him.
Ago.
I don't know him. I'm just
Johnny baby.
Do you know John?
Yeah, I used to go to the Hollywood Bowl shows every year, and there was I think there was one year we got to go backstage and say hello, and that was I've got it somewhere in here. I've got I just got it from my parents' house. I need to hang it up, but there's a photo of us when I was a kid. He signed a playbill, but I'm close with his brother though, who's a timpanist, and he actually played on.
Now you have to get timpani in your house.
I know. Well, look, I can just go over to his place. It's like,
That's true.
it's like 5 minutes from me. Oh,
That's true.
He's got the timpani. I'm
So you
in
said
an
his
apartment. I
brother-
don't have room for timpani.
So you said his brother played on Skeleton Crew?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Don Williams. Yeah.
Don
Yeah.
and John?
Well, it's really funny because John's the oldest, and then he's got a brother Jerry, and then Don. So it's Don, John, and Jerry. But there's a little rhyme.
Jerry's like Jerry.
I think it was like one of those things where it was like, oh, like Donald sounds different than John, and then
Right.
like a year or two in, you start calling him Don, and you're like, oh, what did we do?
Oh no.
Or it's like you're happy about it, but it's
Michael and Mick.
Michael. Well, my legal name is Michael because it's an Italian naming tradition. I'm Michael the Third.
I got you beat, buddy.
Are you a fourth?
Yeah.
No
and my
way.
son is the fifth.
Oh my God. See, that's what
you have work to do.
Friends ask. That's what all my friends ask me. They're like, "Are you gonna do a fourth?" And I'm like, I feel like I have to come up with a new nickname, because my grandfather would go by Mike. My dad was Michael. I'm Mick, and I'm like, I got to figure out something else that's cool and unique for
Yeah, I was Johnny, and now my son's Johnny, but my wife's always called me Johnny. So anytime I know she's talking to him, and she's like mad at him or whatever, like, Johnny, clean up your room. I'm like, I already cleaned up my room. She's like, shut up.
It was funny when you had Johnny. You said you were naming him John, and I was like, "Oh, you don't want to do it?" You're like, "I'm not breaking that tradition. I'm not doing." It's
that's
not
the
work."
thing.
That's the other thing. It's like it's a little scary at this point. I'm like, all right, I've got a third already, so it's
I
like
put the burden on him.
Yeah.
Now it's up to him.
Exactly.
But
there's also some parts of me that are like, oh, like there's all these extra steps, or I mean, they're minuscule, and it's just more like, but I'm like having to add the third onto things, and like when I was growing up, there were times where like plane tickets would get canceled because they thought we were the same person and stuff like that, and I'm like,
no.
do I save my son the little things, or do I just be like, you know what, I had to grow up with it, you do too, like, so.
You'll know in the moment, I'm sure,
Exactly.
when it happens.
Yeah. Also, I'm sure it depends on what my wife would think as well.
That's a factor. Yeah, she got to name our daughter, so it was a fair, split.
Yeah.
But what do you have? Do you have anything you talk about coming up? Do you want to work in Star Wars again? Say, if it's not Skeleton Crew, like, do you want to get your paws on a Star Wars movie? Because there's a bunch announced and stuff like that. Like, where are you at with your future in Star Wars?
I mean, I would love to continue with Star Wars. It's such, a fun sandbox, an exciting sandbox to get to play in, and just, I feel just so honored to even just have had the chance to do this thing, and so any opportunity I would get to do more, I would instantly jump at. I don't know exactly what it would be that I would want to do, but it's kind of, a movie would be amazing to get to see it in theaters, and
I want to see you do like full themes for like full Realized Jedi.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be a lot of fun.
I think that would be fun because like Jod was like sort of,
Yeah,
I want
exactly.
a quirky droid theme. That's
quirky
what I want.
droid theme. Yeah. Yeah, we'll pull out the tuba or bassoon for that.
And then a theme for your Wookiee that you're going to play in season 2.
Exactly. Well, that will really, that's the real thing we should be pushing right here, is getting me into that Wookiee character.
We'll get Jonas on the phone. He'll do some like vocalizations.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. Well, Mick, we don't want to keep you forever. We could talk to you for probably 3 hours. But we would love to have you back on in the future.
I'd love to be back on anytime.
Yeah, you have big fans here. Our listeners absolutely love you. I think every Star Wars fan loves you. So I have a feeling if it is announced that one day you are returning to Star Wars, that's going to be a very happy day in fandom when Deadline or whoever breaks that news. So
we want you Giacchinoing all over Star Wars.
Yeah.
Well, don't say it like that. That's
I guess so. Never mind.
But yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on all of your success. Penguin, Skeleton Crew. I mean, you have a monster future ahead of you, and we can't wait to see what's in store for you. And we're going to be rooting for you all the way. And Hopefully you stop back one day, even though you're going to be, the greatest composer at that time. Don't forget
please.
about us. Come back in the
Come
base
on.
and hang out with us and talk Star Wars.
No. I will always. I feel like I'm going to have a lot of free time in the future for this. Yeah.
Well,
anytime.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing what's ahead for you and talking to you down the line.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
There it is. We told you. We told you. We told you. If you didn't love him already, you probably love him more now. And just a wonderful chat with Mick, diving into all the nerdy elements that we love about Star Wars music and what he brought to the table. There's not much else to say. Lacey, another incredible guest, gracious, down to earth. It's just something about this series, and not to take anything away from any other Star Wars series, but every person we've encountered or spoke to, or things you hear about the creation of Skeleton Crew, it just seems like everyone was pulling in the right direction, and they were all supporting each other. And it's just an incredible chat, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah, every time I get to speak to people that work on Star Wars, no matter what facet of it is, whether it's someone that's in the costumes or someone that writes it or writes the music for it, scores it, I'm just so inspired by their level of creativity and their like living their dreams. And it's just always fun to talk to someone like that. So thank you so much, Mick, for joining us and talking through this and just being an inspiration to following what you love and doing what you like to do.
Absolutely. So we hope you all enjoyed it. Let us know what you think in the comments, or email us, social media, or the Patreon Discord. We hope you enjoyed this as much as we enjoyed speaking with Mick. But that's it for us here. We'll be back next week, going back to the classic TRB style. We're going to touch on some news. We're going to touch on some discussions, and we're going to get back into the Star Wars flow next week with Andor around the corner, Celebration around the corner. But now, just enjoy the ride. Mick Giacchino, Skeleton Crew. We hope you enjoyed it. And from us here at TRB, until next time, we'll see you around, kids.